We're now going to hear from Jessica Williams. She's from USA / Australia. She's a feminist activist, author, formerly incarcerated woman, and co-founder of Single Sex Prisons WA. So thank you so much, Jessica. Over to you.
I will share a little bit about myself and then giving a speech about my personal experiences in prison, and then ending with a short presentation and report about the situation in Western Australia with prison policies. My name is, as you know, my name is Jessica Williams. I'm 38 years old. I moved to Western Australia from the United States in 2010. And since then, I've been an activist, and I have accomplished things for animals, people, and the environment. I'm a political lobbyist. I've run a very successful activist organization and website for the last several years. I'm also part of the Women's Human Rights Campaign Australia and New Zealand Working Group. Today, I will be speaking about a topic that is extremely personal to me, and it's something that I know is consistently forgotten about by the general masses, the general public, and our state and federal representatives. I will be speaking about our vulnerable sisters in prison and how our politicians are failing to protect them. I would have preferred to use this opportunity to discuss some of the countless systemic issues that exist within our penal systems and facilities, like deaths in custody, the privatization of jails and prisons, male guards in women's prisons, or the issue of women being incarcerated in the first place. Unfortunately, something is happening now to policies and legislation, which is having a very disturbing effect on incarcerated girls and women. And that issue demands our immediate attention and action. That issue is male prisoners being housed as women in prison. Men can already claim us, women, as an identity in everyday life, but now more and more, they can claim to be a woman and be placed and treated as a woman inside prisons and jails. It's something I never could have imagined happening. Our society should not have reached the point where laws entertained the notion that sex can be changed, or that gender is anything more than a set of sexist and stereotypical traits forced on women and men. Yet we did, and now look at where we are. What is being done to our vulnerable sisters in prison is wrong and unforgivable. The reason this issue is so personal and important to me is because when I was 17 years old, I spent the better part of a year locked up in numerous county jails, as they're referred to in the US, and 2 different prisons. The first prison was maximum security, the North Carolina Department of Corrections. I had been convicted of nonviolent crimes, and they were my first offenses, but nevertheless, there I was, absolutely petrified, extremely vulnerable, and placed as an adult. It was hell on earth, and I genuinely did believe that I might die there. Thankfully, due mainly to my age of 17, I was eventually moved to a minimum security prison to finish my sentence. Even though female prisons are far less violent than male prisons, hierarchies do still exist, and I was at the bottom of the one at Fountain Correctional Center for Women. Due to my age and the fear that resonated off of me, I was threatened on a regular basis, and my belongings were often stolen by other prisoners. I don't hold ill will against them, by the way. Something happens to you when you're inside prison, especially if you're there for a very long time. You have to adapt to your surroundings. When you're separated from your family and everything and are familiar with. So you definitely do have to adapt to your surroundings to survive. Privacy and dignity do not exist in prisons and jails. During my incarceration, upon entry and at any time at the discretion of prison officers, prisoners were required to take off our clothing, including bras and underwear, often within eyesight of other prisoners, and while officers or guards, both male and female, watched us. Then we were each required to turn our backside to the prison officers, spread our butt cheeks, squat and cough 3 times to show that we were not holding any contraband internally. Women with larger breasts had to lift them up one at a time for inspection, and this did apply to other areas of larger bodies as well. Showers and toilets are not private in prison or in jails. In many prisons and jails, you can look across or beside you and see the breasts or full bodies of the other women showering. If other women or guards want to, they can see your entire body during those intimate and vulnerable moments in the shower or while sitting on the toilet. Only in the prison school, where I earned my high school equivalency during my incarceration, did I find bathroom stalls with doors similar to what we see in public bathrooms. But even when using those stalls, if you were ordered to open the door, you had to listen. You were told when to sleep and when to wake and when to eat in prison. When you're a prisoner, your belongings don't really belong to you. Guards can ransack them at any time and confiscate items. You can't have what's considered to be hard jewelry, like certain rings and necklaces. You can't have mobile phones, and you definitely don't have internet access at your fingertips. You can only make phone calls at certain times and for certain lengths of time. And any letters that people send to you are inspected and often opened and read before they reach you, if they reach you at all. You depend greatly on money being sent to you from friends and family to purchase any food and hygiene products above the usual cheap quality of state-issued items. And you have nothing but time. Idle time to anguish over what you are missing out on, what you have done to your life, all of the loved ones you miss, and what terrors may await you the next day. As I mentioned earlier, women in prison are often forgotten by most people and definitely by our politicians, but also by too many feminists. So anytime I have the opportunity to talk about this, I speak honestly and genuinely from my heart to make the most of these opportunities. I hope I leave you with a distinct and lasting feeling of what it could be like to have your freedom taken from you, what it could feel like to be a woman in prison. Not many people will know a woman that has been to prison, much less get to hear about her experiences. But today's attendees are getting that rare opportunity with myself and the other speakers. So please trust me when I say that being incarcerated is by far one of the most isolating, overwhelming, and traumatizing experiences that a human being can go through. And all of that is multiplied exponentially for incarcerated women. Now, the elected officials put in charge of prisons and the policies thereof are allowing male-born people to claim they are women, and they're allowing these men to be housed as women. It is absurd. The organization I co-created, Single Sex Prisons WA, produced a comprehensive report which obliterates any justification for policies which allow men to be housed and treated as women, whether that is allowed because of transsexual status or because of self-identification, because a male is a male with or without a penis, and we are not an identity. Single Sex Prisons WA holds principles which include the support for provisions to address at-risk gender diverse prisoners, because we are well aware of the risks associated with a male that may have breasts housed with other males. But these provisions should never, ever come at the expense of the rights, protections, and provisions for female prisoners. The overwhelming majority of incarcerated women are locked up for nonviolent crimes, and many for the failure to pay fines. especially in Australia with Indigenous women. And of the women convicted of violent crimes, many of them are in prison because they finally found the capacity to defend themselves against violent men. The dilemma of where to house at-risk trans-identified males is not a female prison problem. It is not a female problem. It is a male prison problem, a male problem. Policies which allow male prisoners to be housed as females are not only a perversion of law, facts, and reality, but they are a clear and unlawful breach of our sex-based rights and protections. As women, we know how little of a voice we genuinely have in this world, politically and socially. Our vulnerable sisters in prisons don't even have that. They have a voice, but hardly anyone is listening. They are the forgotten members of our communities. Even dedicated, intelligent, and hyper-aware women routinely forget about prisons and the girls and women inside those lonely and hellish walls. I hope people understand that even the women fighting against having their sport categories invaded, their bathrooms and pools invaded, their clubs and programs taken over, still have options in comparison. We get to go home, be with our family and friends, go on social media to vent and organize with other women, and most importantly, we can freely exercise our right to vote and consistently lobby our politicians to try and change the policies and laws that are harming us. But incarcerated females cannot do those things. They have little to no options and nowhere to escape. They are some of the most vulnerable women on our planet. They are prisoners. They are not pieces of rubbish that our society can just throw away. They are women. They are me. I am a survivor of violence and trauma like most women in prison, and I am a woman that has value and worth, just like every single woman that is stuck inside a dirty, isolated, depressing prison. Remember them. Remember that politicians have abandoned them and their rights. They need us to fight for them just as passionately and consistently as we fight for other causes. Let my story and the stories of the other speakers be burned into your heart and mind so that you never forget them, because we must do more to protect our vulnerable sisters in prison. I am reporting on behalf of Single Sex Prisons WA on the issues incarcerated girls and women are facing in Western Australia pertaining to policies regarding gender identity ideology, self-identification, and then what Single Sex Prisons WA is doing about it. As of September 2020, there were 685 female prisoners in Western Australia, representing just over 10% of the total prison population. Women from Aboriginal communities are significantly overrepresented, comprising 47% of women in prison. This is a shockingly high figure when one considers that the total Aboriginal population in Western Australia comprises only around 2% of the total population in our state. As I mentioned earlier, there are many issues that women in prison face, but the policies which allow males to be housed as females are presenting serious issues that need immediate attention and action. There are two policies in Western Australia of interest regarding either gender identity ideology, transsexual status, or self-ID that are putting incarcerated girls and women at risk. I will focus on the 4.6 policy because it is the one that allows for cross-sex placement based on self-identification. The 4.6 policy was implemented by stealth on November 23rd, 2020, at the very end of the parliamentary sitting year, leaving no time for any raising awareness or opposition. The policy sets out provisions that directly conflict with certain WA legislation, so that's state legislation, primarily the Gender Reassignment Act 2000 and the Equal Opportunity Act 1984. In addition, the 4.6 policy undermines and overrides some protections in the Federal Sex Discrimination Act and CEDAW, specifically Article 1 and 2, as well as Rule 11 of the Nelson Mandela Rules, the UN Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners. This is all stemming from the 2017 WA Labour Party platform called Stronger Together, WA's Plan for Gender Equality, where WA Labor defines women as anyone who identifies as one. And these types of platforms and policies are considered legal due to some changes to our Federal Sex Discrimination Act, where the definitions of woman and man were removed and provisions for gender identity were added. Single-sex prisons WA undertook an extensive review of the 4.6 policy, and as a result, 83 key issues and over 250 secondary issues were identified. I will cover some of those issues now using the articles of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights as a guide. Jails and prisons are segregated by biological sex. We know this, not by identities or feelings, but the 4.6 policy allows trans-identified male prisoners to pick a preferred placement based on their self-proclaimed gender identity. There is no need for hormone treatment or surgery. It also allows for trans-identified male prisoners to request the gender, which is used interchangeably with sex, of the prison officer they want to conduct searches, and that does include strip searches. This is against Australian federal law, but it's still allowed. So the sex-based rights of female prisoners and female prison officers are being infringed upon by such provisions. We have two penal facilities in WA that cater to the particular needs of pregnant and nursing women and their babies. The advancement of this policy will inevitably lead to men identifying into these facilities. Otherwise, it could be seen as discrimination according to inconsistent interpretations of current anti-discrimination laws. Articles 4, 5, and 7 are relevant because the limited and inconsistent resources, programs, and services available for females in prison will become even more inaccessible, not to mention dangerous, when males are given access to those spaces and afforded those resources and services. When male prisoners are housed with females, the freedom of opinion, expression, and movement of girls and women is restricted, whether or not the male prisoners each have a penis. These restrictions can and will occur anywhere in a prison. Article 8 of the Declaration is about reaffirming the need for the elimination of violence against women. Violence against women is a given when males are housed with females in prison, especially considering how much more violent males are and how much more violent male prisons are. In Australian prisons that have already implemented policies like COPP 4.6, women have been harassed and assaulted by trans-identified males. Article 8 also highlights the need to collect accurate sex-segregated data to better assess and address male violence against women and children. The 4.6 policy requires prison officers to collect and keep official records of claimed identities and chosen names instead of biological sex and legal names. So we know that finding thorough and consistent sex-segregated data is not common, and policies like COPP 4.6 are making a bad problem much worse. Article 9 is unfortunately relevant because the 4.6 policy does cover youth facilities and youth detainees. And as mentioned previously, this can negatively impact pregnant and incarcerated women, their babies, and young children. So what has single-sex prisons WA been doing about all of this? As mentioned earlier, we undertook an extensive review and we identified over 300 issues. We've sent that review to state and federal ministers, including the ones listed on the screen, as well as human rights law centers and groups. We've received responses so far from the ones that are highlighted. We have an online petition, which is to the state government, and we are in the process of creating a federal e-petition. We have a Facebook page, a Twitter account, and a website to help us raise awareness and gather people around this issue. We are working closely with two of these speakers today, Heather Mason, creator of Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights, and Kate Coleman, director of Keep Prisons Single Sex UK. And Kate recently added a page to her website for Western Australia where you can go and find the information about this issue and what we're doing. So that's really cool. And thank you, Kate. Our goals through single-sex prisons are simple and straightforward. We want to raise as much awareness as possible about this issue. We want to put a lot of pressure on our state and federal politicians to repeal this policy. And most importantly, we want to have success repealing or amending the laws, which are giving way to policies that allow men to be housed as women in prison.
Brilliant. Heather, there's so much more. It would be great to hear from you, but we're going to have to move on just time. But I'm sure there'll be lots more times. I hope there'll be lots more times to hear from you, and lots more events that the women here can hear from you. So let's go to Jessica Williams now. Have you got anything to add?
Yes, I do. And it happens to coincide with one of the questions from Beck. She asked, do we think feminists should do more to reach out to women in prison or women recently released? Is there anything from my own experience that would have helped in terms of feminist solidarity? Absolutely. There's if I had more time, I'd talk about heaps of different things you could do, but I do have a couple of suggestions. If you would like to support incarcerated girls and women, I encourage you to find your nearest women's prisons. Just go on Google and look up women's prisons near your location and reach out to them. You can usually find an email address. You may get passed around to a couple of people, but just stick at it. Ask them what types of donations they accept and need. Some prisons accept things like yarn, wool or cotton for the women to knit with. Some prisons may accept reading materials. And then some prisons also collect business suits and business attire for women when they go to their court appearances or when they're released, and clothing for when they're released and things like that. So that's definitely something you can do. Reach out to the prisons in your area and the post-release facilities and refuges, domestic violence refuges and things like that. Also, please look into the laws and policies for corrective services in your area. If you find that they are similar to the ones that we've discussed today, please reach out to the relevant politicians, your minister or politicians for corrective services for women, and things like that. Write them emails, letters, call them and lobby them to amend or repeal those policies and laws, and get everyone you can involved along with that. Women in prison definitely need to be remembered and put at the forefront of our minds and our discussions, especially our feminist discussions.